All right, coming to you from 4,200 feet in the hills of Oregon, this is Sam Wilson with the MOA broadcast, the Gear Convoy and Techline Knife Shop and so forth, Wilson Custom Knives. Just going to do a brief video here. Been getting some good feedback on those that like them. I guess some people just like content because, let's face it, I'm not that great. But anyway, after this one, I'll try, I don't know, I may try and do these back in the shop again. It's just so convenient doing these on the phone with the overlay background like I've been doing. It may not look as professional, but guys, it takes a lot of time to get the shop cleaned up enough to where I don't have, crap sticking in the way, and then get the backdrop down, then set up the tripod and do all the stuff to get the camera and everything else. Then you got to edit and everything else. So anyway, you don't like it, don't watch it. I understand completely. It won't hurt my feelings. And for those of you that do, then here you go. Here's some more content. Today we're going to be talking about, before we get to that, we're going to be talking about Sawteeth and serrations on survival knives or knives in general, and what the different types are and what the advantages are for those maybe that are looking at different types of knives, or whether or not to get these features or options on theirs. But I did get a couple of messages from our Patreon subscribers. They did like the iced coffee thing, so we're going to go ahead and do a video on how I make my iced coffees. And again, I'll keep this brief, but no matter how you do it, you're always going to have someone say, oh, you should do this, you should do that. There's no way to make everybody happy on the internet. This will just be the way I make my iced coffees. I think they're really tasty, and I try and keep the ingredients pretty clean too, as opposed to a lot of artificial stuff being added to it. So we'll get to that. In fact, I'll have the sip now. Okay. Let's get to it. Serrations and Sawteeth on survival knives. Now I'm going to try and put an image up behind me so you can get a kind of an idea of what we're talking about, or maybe in front of me. I don't know. There are a couple of different types of Sawteeth that you can get on survival knives. The standard type that I use, and I only use one type on all of my different knives that have the option of getting Sawteeth on them, are just the regular big notched Sawteeth like you would see on the First Blood and the First Blood Part 2 Rambo knives. Okay, now, done properly, those Sawteeth are very effective at a couple of things. They're not extremely effective at sawing in a wilderness setting. They will. It's a lot easier. When I do demonstration videos, I will block the piece of wood in a vise and lock it down, and that allows me to really get into it with the saw. And it is very effective. I can go through a 2x4 or a block of wood, depending on what size, and usually under 30 seconds, as long as the knife is big enough to have, like the smaller knives that don't have enough Sawteeth to really be that fast. But the larger knives will go through a 2x4 in 30 seconds. Would I want to do that more than once? No. It's not very fun. It's labor intensive. You burn a lot of calories, and it's just not that great. The reason being why those saws are limited in their effectiveness is primarily because of the fact that you're using a 1/4 inch blade usually, or maybe a little bit bigger. Some of my knives are 270 or 290 thou thick. You're sneaking up on, between 5/16 and 3/8 there. Yeah, but 5/16 I should say, as far as thickness. That's pretty thick for a saw, so that creates a larger kerf, which is the part of the cut that's being removed. So the more material you're removing, the more effort it's going to take. That's why you want thin saw blades, right? You also have to make sure they're ground properly so that the saw tooth itself is the widest part of the knife if you want maximum efficiency. They will still work if they are the same thickness as, say, the flat of the blade, if you have a grind that doesn't go all the way to the top. But at that point, they're going to be much more effective for notching, like for making traps or joints if you're trying to build something. Very good for making very square joints and corners and cuts. And they're also good for generating or making sawdust for like tinder dust or starting fires or whatever else you might want to use it for. So those type of Sawteeth are very effective for that. I wouldn't want to use them to process wood, especially in the woods, because you have to put a lot of effort into it. And while you're doing that, unless it's blocked in a vise, your piece of wood that you're cutting is going to be moving all over the place, and that equals wasted energy. So those are not going to be extremely effective at that particular purpose. I would limit them to simply making notches for joints, trap triggers, things like that, and generating tinder dust. They're amazing for generating tinder dust very quickly. Now, on my Sawteeth that I produce, the teeth are all facing, backwards towards the guard or towards the user's hand on the knife. This means that the saw is going to cut on the pull stroke. You're probably a little bit stronger in certain situations on the push stroke, depending on how it does. Some people like to do them where they cut on the push stroke. This looks kind of weird because they're facing the opposite direction. I'm not a big fan of these for two reasons. Number one, I'm not sure they really give you any advantage. Some people say they cut better on the push stroke. Maybe. I haven't really used them other than once or twice in samples that I made, and I wasn't that impressed. But the primary reason is not function, it is form. And the bottom line is if you're producing a knife, guys are going to want it to be aesthetically pleasing. And I think that's one of the reasons why the backward-facing Sawteeth never really took off a ton, is because, number one, not many people did them, and number two, they just look awkward. They look like they are backwards. I don't have an image handy to put into the video here, but just imagine the regular Sawteeth like on the Rambo knife. Now they're facing the other way. It just doesn't look that good, in my opinion, and I think most people agree, and that's one of the reasons I never took off. The other problem with those type of Sawteeth, especially on a guardless knife, and some people do have Sawteeth on guardless knives, which I think is a pretty dicey proposition, and I'll get to that in a second, is whenever you're pushing on a knife that has a razor-sharp edge that's now facing straight up in the air while you're using the saw, if you're pushing and cutting on the push stroke, if your hand slips and goes forward, you are literally feeding your hand right into your razor-sharp edge. And that is a recipe for disaster, whether it's in your shop, in your backyard, or in the wilderness. So, especially on knives that don't have guards, because those saws do tend to bind up sometimes when you're cutting. And it would be very easy without a guard. I don't have any Sawteeth on any knives that don't have guards that I make. I just don't think it's a real good idea. Maybe I will in the future if someone requests it. I don't know. But for now, no. But especially on Sawteeth that cut on the push stroke, you're pushing that knife hard. And if your hand slides forward because it hits a knot or it just skips or whatever, you're going to be feeding your hand right into that. It's going to be a bad situation. So that's my thought on that. Now, the other primary type of Sawteeth are the kind that look like the saw on the Swiss Army knife. They have little triangular tips. These are, when they're done properly, are extremely effective. You'll see these on certain types of knives. You'll see them on saws also. I've got one of the Kershaw knives that have these triangular cut Sawteeth. They're very effective. They rip and tear. I don't know that they can ever be sharpened, but honestly, that's not a big deal. You're probably never going to use a saw like that much that it ever needs to be sharpened. My teeth are capable of being resharpened. I've never had to do one, and I don't know how in the world you would cut it with it enough to need to be resharpened. So I wouldn't hold that against them. But they're very effective, especially on thinner knives. Remember, the thicker the knife, the bigger the kerf is, and the more you're having to remove material, and that slows you down and builds up friction and gunk and gets clogged and so forth. So those Sawteeth are very effective. Again, if you're not familiar with these, they look just like the type of Sawteeth that are on one of the Swiss Army pocket knife saws. Very effective. No problem with that. Now, the third topic I want to talk about is serrations. I've talked about this a bunch in the MOA broadcast and on forums and in podcasts and so forth. Serrations are fantastic. I don't know why people hate on them so much. I think a lot of it boils down to a lot of guys. Let me tell you this about the knife industry, okay? Like a lot of other industries, it's not so much about producing the best possible tool. It's about, catching someone's eye. It's like fishing lures. Fishing lures, as the old saying goes, don't catch fish, they catch fishermen. Okay? And it's very, very similar in the knife industry as well. Most guys don't want the absolute most effective, most efficient cutting knife and the most useful tool. They want something that's going to cut, but they also want it to feel cool. They want to believe that they're going to be out there and they could be John Rambo in the woods hunting down Sheriff Teasel in the Pacific Northwest wilderness and so forth, or they could be taking out commies in Afghanistan or whatever the fantasy is that day. The more you take most knives and give them a combat style look or feel, the more knives you're going to sell. The more you add Sawteeth, the more you add some of these features that are never ever going to be useful or needed, the more knives you're going to sell. So anyways, that's another story. But when it comes to the serrations and plain edge, lots of guys just love that idea of being able to hold their Bowie knife or their, whatever survival knife up while they sit by the fire and stare at that plain edge and watch it glimmer, the flames flicker across the blade and that mirror polished plain edge. Serrations are extremely useful. in emergencies. I've done emergency response work before. You always wind up cutting something that's covered in mud or gravel or clay or wire or mesh or something. And if you have a plain edge, a lot of times I've had it happen where it dulls out on like the first or second push cut or the first or second stroke. Serrations will continue to cut because they rip and tear, while plain edges are basically useless now. So just something to think about. Why don't I have serrations on my knives? I've discussed this before. I offered it in the beginning, and I've got a few of them out there somewhere that do have serrations, but the bottom line is they don't sell. Most people don't want serrations. Either they don't know how, or they're afraid to try and sharpen them. They don't like the way they look. They have some sort of bias against them, whatever. That's their business. And I'm not telling people what to do. I'm just giving my thoughts on how and why this works. Most of which I believe is factual. I can prove. But if people don't want them, they don't want them. So I got a choice, right? I can either be right or I can sell knives. What am I in business to do? Am I in business at Wilson Custom Knives or Techline Knives to be right or to sell knives? So you got to make a business decision at that point. And that's why I don't offer any serrations. People just didn't want them as much. So there you go. That's going to cover it today. Everybody make sure you catch our latest episodes of the podcast at gearconvoy.com. You can find the MOA, the Make It Out Alive broadcast there. You can get it on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, all of them. Or you can simply catch it on YouTube or our Patreon page at Gear Convoy. That's going to do it. Stay safe out there, folks.